there. Christy Brock back, and I'm going to be reading some books. Some of you know me from CCPS, some of you know me from Art Shop or First Baptist, and some of you know that I'm a pottery teacher, but some of you don't. So one of the books that intrigued me when I was walking through the Cullman Library was this one called The Willow Pattern. As a pottery person, it's anything to do with ceramics or pottery is hard to find at the library. And so this, I checked it out, and this is just a wonderful book. And it was kind of a weird day. We'd had a cat for about 1.5 years, and she passed away. And my son was heartbroken, and I didn't know what to do. And so we sat on the couch, and this was on the arm of the couch from checking it out at the library. And I picked it up and I started reading it to him. And I just thought, oh, this is absurd. We need to be talking about the cat. But I wanted to take his mind off of it. And it ended up being a treasure to us. And the back says, taste and fashions change, but the Willow Pattern has retained its appeal for almost 200 years and inspired countless collections of blue and white china. Here is one artist version of the poignant love story that can be read in the design. The Willow Pattern Story by Alan Drummond. Fly with me over China and down into the landscape of the willow pattern. Come smell the exotic scents of peonies and camellias below the windows of the great, this word's hard, Patago. Hear the sweet songs of the birds in the paradise garden and the faint sounds of waves lapping against the little boat carried downriver by the tide. See, under the weeping willow, 3 figures hurrying across a bridge, and high above, 2 mysterious lovebirds forever kissing. In a Pataga, beside the weeping willow tree, an old Chinese mandarin lived with his beautiful daughter, Kung Shi. And if I'm not saying Pataga right, leave comments in below. Tell me how to say it. The Pataga garden was surrounded on one side by a wide, deep river, and on the other side, a zigzag fence too high to climb. The garden was Kung Shi's prison, for she was forbidden to leave it. Her father would say, "My child, I have promised your hand in marriage to the old merchant, Tai Jian. Until that day, you must hide your face from everyone but me." So the birds became Kung Shi's only friends. And among the fantastic shapes of apples and oranges and fir tree, the scattered petals of peonies and camellias, they called to her all day long and came to her hand for food. On a hill near the edge of the garden, a little house overlooked the landscape. The mandarin's servant, Chang, worked at his desk. He managed all the old man's business. He cared for the plants in the tree. He too knew the birds by name, and they came to his window ledge for food. It was spring, and before long, Kung Shi and Chang had fallen in love. But how had this happened? A pair of turtle doves knew their secret. The 2 birds began carrying messages from them written on tiny pieces of bamboo paper across the treetops. One morning, Chang wrote, "As the willow blossom falls onto the water, so my heart flies to you. Meet me on the banks of the river as the tide turns under the moon." When the night came, the lovers finally met under the weeping willow, hidden from the great Pataga by an apple tree. But at that moment, the mandarin awoke, and going out into the moonlight, he saw his daughter in Chang's arm. The mandarin's anger at finding his daughter with a poor servant was so great that he sent Chang away forever. Then he told Kung Shi that she must forget Chang and marry the old merchant. This she would not do, so he ordered a house to be built, jutting out into the river within the side of the great Pataga. Here he locked Kung Shi away. A year passed, and one day the mandarin took his friend, the old merchant, to see Kung Shi. In horror, she saw Tai Jian had brought an engagement gift, and his fingernails were curled around the box of jewels. He looked at her young face with his old eyes, and showing her the box, he nodded stiffly to the mandarin. The 2 men went away to plan the wedding. That night, Kangxi sat weeping at her window, and suddenly the moonlit water below, she noticed a floating coconut shell. She reached out, and lifting it up, she found inside a tiny paper message from Chang. With great joy, she guessed that he must be hiding nearby. She wrote a reply on rice paper and made it into a sail and sent the little boat out again onto the water. Her message read, "Gather your fruit when the willow blossom drops onto the water." She hoped would help Chang to guess the date of her wedding. But no word came from Chang. Right up to the wedding night, Kangxi waited for another message. Lanterns were lit and hung amongst the trees, and eventually she was taken into the patagao where Tajin was waiting to marry her. The box of jewels opened beside him. But just as the old merchant bent to kiss her hand, Chang, disguised as a boatman, leapt out of the crowd of guests. In a moment of fright, Kangxi snatched up the jewel box, and together the young lovers ran down to the river. The mandarin chased after them, and for a moment they could be seen on a little humpback bridge, Chang leading the way to his boat, Kangxi carrying the box of jewels, and the old mandarin close behind them, brandishing a lantern. The tide flowed away to the east and carried the little boat. Chang steered the silent waters, and Kangxi lay safe inside the cabin. Soon they were far away. Their long river journey took them to the poorest part of China where only farming was possible, but they were young and strong and happy to be together. In great secrecy, Chang sold the jewels and bought her farm. At last, Kangxi and Chang were married, and together they planted apple trees, which under Chang's expert eyes always hung heavy with fruit. But what of the old mandarin? Every year, he sent out a new secretary far and wide to search for the whole of China for Kangxi and Chang. Left alone, he grew old and bitter, and the garden became wild without Chang's care, and the fruit and blossoms did not appear on the trees, and soon all the birds in the garden flew away. Only the 2 turtle doves remained, cooing in their cage where Kangxi had left them. The birds' calling began to make the mandarin angry, and then one day he opened the cage and let them go. Swift as arrows, the birds flew directly east, and in that moment, he knew they were flying directly to Kangxi and Chang. The mandarin ordered another search, and it was not long before the lovers were brought back to the garden as prisoners. He ordered them to be thrown in an underground passage that formed a maze beneath the patagao. Day after day, the lovers wandered in the blackness, seeking a way out, but that eventually led to a blank wall, and in the darkness, they felt as though they were traveling in a great circle, and every turn brought them closer to death. Gone forever were the days in the beautiful apple orchard, and never again would they smell a scent of peonies and camellias at night. Never would they hear the sound of birds in the garden, nor the lapping of waves against the boat carried downriver by the tide. Kangxi and Chang died together in a great maze underground, and at the same time, the lonely, bitter mandarin died in the patagao above. At once, the garden fell silent. The breeze stopped, and with the leaves on the tree were stilled. The water of the river ceased their movement as if frozen. The patagao and its surroundings seemed to be bathed in a thin blue moonlight. But the gods had taken pity on poor Kangxi and Chang at the very instant when they died in each other's arms, and they were transferred into 2 immortal doves. In joy they flew up into the sky, where even today you can see them, forever kissing one another in eternal love, high above the landscape of the willow pattern. The end.